It's Friday, and I am so ready for a feel-good story. This one is so delicious that it comes with our very first viewer warning label, NSFB, not safe for billionaires. So if there are any billionaires near your screen, please pause for a moment, move them away, and we can continue. I can wait a moment. Here's why. They will find this legal news so obscene because it portends a future date when some of their excess wealth will be stripped away. What am I talking about? Yesterday's Supreme Court decision in a case not many people are paying attention to, Moore versus United States. And don't just take my word for it that this is going to bring on billionaire tears. You can look at what the other side has to say, namely the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal. They wrote that as a result of this decision, the door is now cracked open for a wealth tax. Woohoo! Let me tell you a bit more about this. On the surface, this case looked like just a sweet married couple, Charles and Kathleen Moore from Washington State, who had paid their taxes but wanted a refund for about $14,700 of it. Here's why. They objected to something called the mandatory repatriation tax. Please don't let your eyes roll. This is really important. Here's the bottom line. They were not really what this case was about. Let me tell you why. This mandatory repatriation tax was part of the Donald Trump tax plan. Honestly, it was the one that was passed at the very end of 2017. Remember that giveaway to the wealthy and corporations where the corporate tax rate was lowered from 35 to 21%? All of that needed some balancing offsets. And so one of the offsets they put in this bill so the rich folks could get their tax cuts was the so-called mandatory repatriation tax. I've said it enough. What do I mean? And what in the world does this couple from Washington have to do with it? Okay, for years and years and years, giant corporations in the U.S. had a lot of income that they earned offshore. And they just kept it there, so to speak, on the books, so they didn't have to bring it to the U.S. and pay taxes on it. And they were deferring the tax hit for years and years and years. So finally, as part of the Trump tax law, was this mandate that they suddenly had to act as if they were bringing it on shore and pay taxes. And that's why the Moores had to, because they were owners. They had a controlling interest in a small company based in India. Now, why did this case make it all the way up to the Supreme Court? Because this involved $340 billion. Yes, $340 billion in income for the U.S. Treasury from these corporations. And so there are a lot of corporations, including the one Mr. Moore worked for, Microsoft, that had already paid tens of billions of dollars toward their tax debt and would have benefited greatly if the tax was reversed. So the good news is the Supreme Court said, no, it will stand up. Great. Now, what in the world does that have to do with taxing billionaires on their wealth or creating a special tax for billionaires? The best way to explain this is to refer to a specific piece of legislation that is now being considered by Congress. This was introduced by Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon, and he has many supporters backing this legislation. And fundamentally, the best way to understand it is to talk about the loophole this billionaire income tax is trying to close. Let's compare you and I to a billionaire. You and I pay taxes on the income we earn from our wages because it's withheld from our paychecks, right? And sometimes you get a refund and sometimes you owe more. But that's not how it works for the billionaires. The billionaires engage in what Ron Wyden calls, and many investigative journalists at ProPublica call, buy, borrow, die. This is the loophole that they use. And when you understand it, you will never forget it, and you will understand why we need this billionaire income tax. Okay. What billionaires will do is take money and invest it in assets at low prices, whether it's art or financial instruments like stocks or bonds, or real estate and so on. And they will invest. And as that investment grows, let's say they start with something worth, some investment worth $100 million and now it's worth $500 million. Well, that's sitting there somewhere on paper. And, they sure would like to spend it to pay for a yacht or spend it to pay for their, monthly, co-op fee or pay for some travels and so on. But if they, realize that income, if they sold some of that stock or they sold that painting or they sold that real estate, they would have to pay income tax. Now, of course, some of that income tax would be at a lower level than you and I do because capital gains, gains on investments are taxed at a lower rate. But even so, they would have to pay taxes and they hate paying taxes. So what they do, instead of selling, they buy, they don't sell, they borrow. They take that real estate or that piece of art or those investments and they use it as collateral. When you borrow money, you don't pay taxes on it. So again, they buy something, it goes up in value. They don't sell, so they don't have any gains. They don't have any income. They borrow against it. And then what do? They live their lives. They never pay back the debt, ever, ever, ever. And then they die. And given how our estate laws are rigged, these assets often get passed along to the children and other beneficiaries of this billionaire tax-free. And the cycle does continue. And without getting into details, the full purpose of the Wyden legislation would be to close that loophole. It would only apply to those who have at least $1 billion in assets or $100 million in income over a 3-year period. Okay, our next story, moving off winning the tax war, is the loose cannon, specifically Judge Eileen Cannon, who this morning is beginning an all-day hearing where she is considering arguments as to whether Jack Smith should be disqualified as the special counsel on the criminal case over which she is presiding, involving the documents that Donald Trump unlawfully took from the White House and kept at Mar-a-Lago and other locations that contain national security secrets and so on. Oh, good. It is time for Crazy Town. Crazy Town now is a book, and it is called Apprentice in Wonderland. I cannot wait to read it. The author, Ramin Satuda, has been making the rounds on television, and unbelievably, he has revealed that Donald Trump, who sat with him on many interviews after he was no longer president, said things that betray the fact that he is not, and I think we knew this, all there at all. One example I just heard about was that during an interview, he said, "I've got to go right now. I've got to get back to managing or handling the war in Afghanistan." Take a listen.
The reason I'm doing this and devoting a lot of time to it, I have to get back up because, I'm doing the whole thing with the Afghanistan. Has he blown that Afghanistan?
I have not made it a practice to recommend books here on Morning Jen, but in this case, I want to be honest with you. I can't wait to read or listen on Audible. Okay, have a fantastic weekend, and I will see you again on Monday morning.